The sound was biblical. It wasn't the sharp crack of a branch snapping or the dull thud of something dropping. It was a groan, a high-pitched, drawn-out shriek of stressed material giving up, quickly followed by a guttural, earth-shaking thwoom that felt less like a noise and more like a physical shove to the spine. I was on my porch, enjoying the deep satisfaction of a perfectly brewed sweet tea and the sight of my recently replanted rose bushes, the glorious, hard-won midnight velvet hybrids, thriving in the afternoon sun. But the sound, which I can only describe as a freight train colliding with a library full of brittle Roman pottery, demanded attention. I stood up, adjusting my faded gardening apron, and walked the 30 feet to the property line separating my meticulously manicured yard from the perpetually dusty, slightly too green sprawl of Karen's lot. And there she was. Karen, standing in the middle of her zoysia lawn, the one she swore was the only true grass worthy of a respectable American home, with both hands trembling at her sides. But her attention wasn't on me. It was on her house. The house, a perfectly boring 2-story colonial that looked like it had been extruded from a mold marked suburban mediocrity, was no longer perfect. A massive, jagged fissure, dark and menacing, ran like a scar from the bottom edge of her foundation, diagonally across the beige siding, straight up to the corner of her second-floor master bathroom window. And protruding aggressively from the thickest part of the crack, right where the house met the dirt, was a thick, woody clump of moso bamboo. It looked less like a plant and more like a bundle of angry, verdant rebar actively tearing the structure apart. Karen turned her head, slowly, like a malfunctioning animatronic. Her eyes, usually narrowed into judgmental slits, were wide and moist. She lifted a shaking finger and pointed it directly at my chest, not at the bamboo, not at the house, but at me. "You!" she shrieked, the sound cracking higher than her foundation. "You did this, you psychopath! My house is cracked in half. Do you hear me? Cracked! In half!" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, feeling the ice cubes click against the glass. The heat was relentless, but the satisfaction was a cool, soothing balm. Did I do it? I pondered this internally, letting the question hang in the sticky air. Well, yes, but I only provided the tools. The earth did the heavy lifting. And frankly, she started it. The sight of that vengeful bamboo, its roots burrowed deep into the unforgiving clay, transported me back 3 months to the day I lost my babies. The day of the rose betrayal. My midnight velvet roses were not just flowers. They were a lifestyle. They were a statement. They were the product of 3 years of meticulous, back-breaking hybridization, culminating in a velvety bloom so dark it was almost black, earning me the first-place blue ribbon at the regional horticultural fair. They were perfection. Nestled in their bespoke beds, 5 feet from the property line. I remember finding them. It was a Tuesday. They weren't wilted from thirst. They were dead from spite. The leaves were yellowing with a ghastly chemical speed, drooping like defeated flags. The black buds were dissolving into a sickly brown sludge. I dropped to my knees, a soundless scream trapped in my throat, and scraped some soil into a sterile sample bag. I rushed it to an independent agricultural testing facility, the same place that certified my prize-winning soil. The next day, the technician called me. "Mr. Avery," he said, his voice flat with professional disappointment. The contamination is near total. We found concentrated traces of glyphosate, Mr. Avery, specifically the commercial-grade formula. It was a targeted kill. I knew. I didn't need a lab report. I needed a perpetrator. I walked back outside, and there she was, Karen, kneeling by her ridiculous bed of artificially uniform pink petunias, watering them with an absurdly large, crystal-clear watering can. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too bright. "Oh, Leo," she cooed, using my first name with the false familiarity she reserved for neighborhood watch meetings. "Are your little black posies giving you trouble? They look dreadfully sickly." I held the lab report, still folded, in my sweating hand. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously low, "did you, by any chance, use any weed killer near the property line recently?" She stood up, brushing the dirt from the knees of her pristine white capri pants. "Me? Heavens, no! I only use organic fertilizer on my lawn. I would never poison a plant, Leo. That would be just mean." The emphasis on mean was so pronounced, it might as well have been delivered with a wink and a knife. The look she gave me, that perfect, smug blend of innocence and triumph, sealed the deal. My roses were dead because they were beautiful, and Karen's petunias were merely acceptable. Her mediocrity couldn't stand my excellence. That day, the roses died. But something else was born. A plan. A magnificent, slow-burn, ecologically devastating plan that started small, with a little water. The immediate, rational part of my brain screamed, "File a police report! Sue her for the replacement value of the hybrids!" But my soul, battered and grieving over the midnight velvet, whispered, "No. This is beneath the courts. This is a matter of natural justice, of proportional yet deniable revenge." Besides, proving Karen was the one who applied the glyphosate, a substance readily available to anyone, was nearly impossible without surveillance. The emotional satisfaction would be minimal compared to the headache of legal discovery. I needed something that would hurt her property the way she hurt mine, but that I could plausibly deny with a straight face and an earnest expression. I started small. I started with a flood. 3 days after the Rose betrayal, I purchased a set of powerful, industrial-grade sprinkler heads and a high-velocity pump system. I installed them perfectly legally, on my side of the property, but aimed them with the precision of a German artillery officer. Specifically, I aimed one at a 20-foot stretch of the boundary line, directing a solid, unrelenting torrent of water right into Karen's prized zoysia grass, and, more importantly, directly up against her foundation. I called it Operation Mild Inconvenience. For 3 days, I let it run. Not continuously, that would be suspicious. But from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., and again from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Peak watering hours. I created a localized, permanent monsoon event. Her perfect lawn turned into a squishy, dark green bog that smelled faintly of stagnation. Her pristine white foundation developed a sickly dark water line. On the morning of the 3rd day, the banging started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a rhythmic, angry percussion against my solid oak front door. I peered through the peephole. Karen's face, usually the color of slightly overcooked chicken, was flushed a furious, vibrant beet red. I opened the door, a look of profound, gentle confusion on my face. "Karen, good morning. You sound distressed. Is everything all right?" "Don't you dare good morning me, Leo!" she shrieked, making sure her voice carried across the cul-de-sac. You know exactly what is wrong. You are flooding my property. My lawn is ruined. It feels like quicksand. And you are going to give me mold!" I let my eyes widen slowly, a masterful performance of dawning horror. "Flooding? Oh my goodness, I have been having a terrible time with those contractors. They came to install my new high-efficiency system, you see, and I just can't seem to get the heads calibrated properly." I paused, pointing dramatically toward the water feature that was her lawn. "That looks absolutely dreadful, Karen. I am so sorry. Those incompetent contractors, they never do the job right. You can't trust anyone these days." "You are aiming it directly at my house, you liar!" she practically sputtered. I shook my head mournfully. "I assure you, I am only aiming to ensure proper coverage for my lawn. I had to replace the rose bushes, you know. Poor things died unexpectedly. I need to ensure the new ones have optimal hydration." I let my eyes linger on hers for a beat, a subtle yet unmistakable reminder of her initial crime. "I'll tell you what I'll do," I continued, slipping into my persona of the helpful but harassed neighbor. "I will turn it down, after I've verified that the water pressure is optimal for my remaining plants. You understand, I can't risk another tragedy." She clenched her fists. "You fix it now, or I'm calling the police." "Of course, Karen, you do what you must. My conscience is clear." She marched back to her soggy yard. I'd turned the water off, but only after she had retrieved her cell phone. I watched her from my window as she made the call, gesticulating wildly at the water line on her house. The police arrived 30 minutes later. 2 of them. Officer Reynolds, a middle-aged woman with the weary expression of someone who has dealt with one too many neighborhood turf wars involving bird feeders, and Officer Miller, a young, earnest rookie with a clipboard and a too-tight uniform. Officer Reynolds approached my door while Officer Miller stood in the soggy section of Karen's yard, gingerly trying not to sink. "Mr. Avery," Reynolds began, her voice already signaling her desire for this to be over. "We received a complaint from your neighbor, Ms. Albright, about intentional property flooding." "Officer, please come in," I invited, stepping back. "I am happy to cooperate. This has been a complete nightmare. Contractors, you know." I led her to the garage, where I had meticulously laid out the new sprinkler system's packaging, and the manual opened to a page detailing complex plumbing schematics. "You see, officer," I began, adopting a tone of highly specialized technical frustration, "we are dealing with a faulty BSP threaded valve connected to a new industrial-grade pump. The pressure regulator is simply not seating properly, causing excessive lateral spray. It's a common issue with non-unionized installation crews." I pointed to a confusing diagram. When I set the output to 45 psi, I am only supposed to get a radial spread of 15 feet. But due to this faulty G-Frax/3/4-Gesustonward connector, I estimate the hydraulic flow rate is exceeding the rated output, pushing the spray pattern into a 25-foot parabola. Officer Reynolds's eyes glazed over instantly. She looked like she was trying to calculate the national debt in her head. Meanwhile, Officer Miller walked up to the doorway, clipboard in hand, looking eager to assist. "Sir," Miller said, trying to be authoritative, "Ms. Albright states you are intentionally engaging in what she calls water-based terror and destroying her property line." I turned to Miller, my expression one of wounded innocence. "Officer, that is a grievous accusation. I am a gardener. I am obsessed with water conservation. I would never deliberately waste municipal resources, let alone maliciously damage a neighbor's property. I merely have a faulty system, installed by incompetent people. I have documentation." I slapped the manual. "I even have a receipt for a new regulator, which I am installing this afternoon. I can't be responsible for a manufacturer's defect, can I?" Reynolds cut in, clearly done with the plumbing lesson. "Mr. Avery, you need to fix the alignment of those sprinklers immediately. Regardless of the technical reasons, your water is causing a disturbance. Ms. Albright is concerned about her foundation." I nodded earnestly. "Absolutely, officer, I understand. I will manually adjust the lateral flow until the new regulator arrives. I sincerely apologize for the disturbance. I'll make sure the spray pattern is completely focused on my side, optimal for my Midnight Velvet Rose replacements." Reynolds sighed, giving me a long look that said, "I know you are doing this deliberately, but you've given me nothing to cite." They left, with Officer Reynolds giving Karen a final, brief warning to handle civil property disputes civilly. Karen stood on her squelching lawn, staring at me as I dramatically walked over and very slowly twisted the sprinkler heads away from her house. I had won the first round. I had achieved irritation, deniability, and I had seen the seed of genuine fear about her foundation planted in her eyes. But the damage wasn't proportional. The roses were a permanent loss. The swamp would dry. I needed something that wouldn't dry, something that would grow. The sprinkler incident was satisfying, yes, but ultimately futile. It was a skirmish, not a war. It was the equivalent of Karen slapping me with a copy of a homeowners association bylaw. I needed to deliver the retaliatory equivalent of a nuclear bunker buster disguised as a decorative shrub. The epiphany arrived while I was staring at the water stains on Karen's foundation, contemplating the very nature of foundation damage. What was the most insidious, structural, slow-burn force on Earth? Water, yes. But water takes time. Time I had, but not in the 5 to 10 year span required for simple erosion. No, I needed something that would grow, something with an unstoppable vegetative will. I needed a plant that wasn't just a plant. I needed a creeping, subterranean agent of chaos. I began my research. I called it Project Invasive Species Structural Integrity Test. My initial search was for deep-rooted, aggressive shrubs. Ivy was too easy to pull. Wisteria was too slow. Then, the glorious name appeared on my screen, repeated in warnings, horror stories, and legislative bans across the nation. Running bamboo. Specifically, Philostachys aurea and the notorious P. edulis, MOSO. They weren't like the clumping bamboos that sat politely in a pot. These were runners. Their rhizomes, the root structures, were like thick, sharp cables that traveled horizontally up to 20 feet a year, penetrating soil, concrete, asphalt, and yes, even minor cracks in a house foundation. A single rhizome can exert forces of nearly 600 pounds per square inch as it expands, searching for sunlight. It was nature's rebar covered in spite. I was hooked. This wasn't vandalism, this was harnessing geology. My next step was to acquire the material, but first I needed to gather intel and maintain my facade of the harmless homeowner. This required strategic, dialogue-driven inquiries. My first interaction was at Gary's Garden and Gravel, the most upscale nursery in the county. I approached a teenage clerk named Kevin, who was more interested in his AirPods than in horticulture. "Excuse me, Kevin," I said, putting on my most earnest suburban dad voice. "I am looking for a truly effective privacy barrier. My wife insists on something tall and dense, something aggressive." Kevin slowly removed one AirPod. "Aggressive? We got juniper. They're slow. We got Leyland cypress. They're fast." No, I need something with commitment," I insisted. "Something that, once planted, you simply cannot get rid of. something that absolutely will not tolerate a boarder. I leaned in conspiratorially. My neighbor, you see, she has a dog. A very large, very loud dog. I need something that can stand up to a lot of friction. Kevin's eyes finally lit up with a hint of understanding. Oh, you want the Terminator of plants. You want Running Bamboo. Running Bamboo, I repeated, savoring the name. Tell me about it. Dude, we don't sell it, Kevin said, checking over his shoulder. It's basically illegal to sell in this county without a $5,000 containment system built into the purchase. It's a monster. You put that near a septic line, it'll be inside the pipe in a year. Put it near a driveway, it looks like a bomb went off. It doesn't grow up. It grows everywhere. The roots, the rhizomes, are like structural members that hate property lines. I feigned disappointment. That sounds dreadful, a terrible nuisance. I would hate to accidentally plant something so destructive near a neighbor's foundation. Just hypothetically, how close would one need to plant it to a foundation to cause real, irreparable structural movement within, say, 3 to 4 years? Kevin looked terrified. Dude, I can't even. Don't do it. But hypothetically, if you planted it within 5 feet, the rhizomes hit the foundation. They can't go through the wall, so they just get thicker and thicker until the foundation gives a little, and then they wedge. Fascinating. Thank you, Kevin. I will stick to the much less aggressive Leyland cypress. My second conversation was crucial. I needed a professional opinion to both guide my planting and serve as an internal justification. I hired a reputable landscaper, a man named Marcus with a massive beard and an honest smile, to come give me a quote on a decorative border along the property line. I walked him to the fence line, exactly 10 feet from Karen's house. Marcus, I said, pointing at the spot, I'm considering a dense bamboo barrier here, not the clumping kind, the running kind. I like the look. Very zen. Marcus scratched his beard. Running bamboo? Look, Leo, I appreciate the vision, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give you the warning. The law says you have to install a containment barrier, minimum 36 inches deep, and ideally 6 feet from any structure. And if I were to, say, skip the containment barrier and plant it a little closer to the fence, say 5 feet, from the fence, which is 8 feet from her house, what would be the likely outcome? Marcus's honest smile vanished. The outcome? Sir, if you plant that stuff within 10 feet of an unbarriered foundation, you might as well hand the neighbor a sledgehammer. That rhizome network is like rebar covered in pure spite. It doesn't seek water, it seeks weakness. It finds the tiny hairline crack that every foundation has, and it exploits it. It's a slow, natural demolition project. Within 5 years, that house will need tens of thousands in structural work. He paused, lowering his voice. Look, I like you, Leo. I can't in good conscience take that job. I wouldn't want the liability. I'll plant you a gorgeous hedge of boxwoods, though. They're polite. Thank you, Marcus, I said, shaking his hand firmly. I appreciate your honesty. I'll think about the boxwoods. The interaction was perfect. Marcus's professional horror confirmed everything I needed to know. The plan was ecologically devastating, structurally sound, and almost entirely deniable as malicious intent. It was now cemented as the final, necessary escalation. Acquiring the material was next. No reputable nursery would sell Moso without a massive liability waiver. I found my source, naturally, through the dark corners of the internet. A fly-by-night operation 2 counties over called Jeb's Unsupervised Exotics. Jeb's place was less a nursery and more a field of aggressive, unkempt plants guarded by a snarling chihuahua. Jeb, a man who seemed to communicate mostly in grunts and tobacco juice, eyed the cash I laid on the counter. "You want the Moso starter clumps, huh?" he wheezed. "They'll spread like a rumor in a small town. You know what you're doing with these?" "I'm building a privacy screen," I said, holding his gaze. "A very, very private screen." "Don't plant 'em near nothing you care about," Jeb advised, taking the money. "And don't plant 'em near nothing anyone else cares about either. Especially not a building. Them roots ain't got no conscience. Once they run, you gotta dig a trench and pour concrete to stop 'em." I loaded the thick, aggressive clumps of Moso bamboo, roots still wrapped in damp burlap, into the back of my SUV. The seller's advice was a perfect mix of criminal enablement and genuine gardening tips. The project had moved from a petty feud to a highly structured, long-term operation. I was no longer just a wronged gardener. I was a botanical saboteur. The stage was set. The logistics of Operation Root Vengeance were complex. This couldn't be done in broad daylight. It had to be a clandestine affair, a highly illegal gardening montage executed under the cover of night. I was a spy, and my weapon was a shovel. The plan was as follows. Preparation. Purchase large rolls of landscape fabric, mounds of topsoil, and a large wooden sign reading, "French Drain in Progress. Keep off!" This provided the perfect deniable cover. Timing. Plant the bamboo as close to Karen's foundation as possible. A mere 3 feet from the property line, putting the rhizomes within 7 feet of her wall, directly on the path Marcus, the honest landscaper, had warned against. The trench. Dig a deep, 3-foot trench, ensuring the roots were angled toward her foundation, giving them a slight head start on the invasion. I started the digging that night at 11:30 p.m., wearing all black, except for my yellow gardening gloves. My headlamp was aimed down, and I played classical music, Mozart specifically, because its complexity calmed my nerves, at a very low volume on a portable speaker, using the music to mask the low scrape of the shovel against the earth. My inner monologue was the only witness to my guilt, and I spent the time justifying my actions. It's not vengeance, it's ecological rebalancing. It's simply the environment correcting an imbalance caused by chemical poisoning. I am merely facilitating nature's judgment. The Moso clumps were heavy and aggressive even out of the ground. Their roots felt like muscle. As I nestled the first one into the damp earth, I gave it a silent, internal pep talk. Go forth, my friend. Find the weakness. Exploit the injustice. The paranoia was a constant companion. Every distant siren, every passing car, every sound from Karen's house felt like the flashing lights of an incoming police cruiser. On the second night of planting, I had a terrifyingly close call. I was finishing the 3rd clump, sweating profusely, when the light flicked on in Karen's master bedroom. I froze, sinking to my knees in the muddy trench. Oh God, I whispered, dropping the shovel. I scurried sideways, crawling on my hands and knees until I reached the back of my own defunct rosebed. I pressed myself into the thorny tangle, praying the thorns didn't pierce the thick material of my clothes. A minute later, Karen's back door opened. "Did you hear that, George?" she called into the darkness. "I thought I heard a digging noise. It sounded like an animal, maybe a badger." She stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, scanning the darkness. The irony of me hiding in the very spot where she had murdered my floral masterpieces was not lost on me. I was seeking refuge in the graveyard of my trauma. "George, check the sprinklers," she hissed. A moment later, George, Karen's meek husband, who was basically an accessory to her personality, appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Karen, it's 1 o'clock a.m. There's no badger. It's the neighbors. They probably just dropped something. Karen sniffed the air dramatically. I smell dirt. Heavy, freshly turned dirt. I'm telling you, Leo is up to something. He's been out here every night since I called the police on him. She took 2 steps out onto her lawn. I held my breath. She was 3 feet from my hiding spot. I could hear her quiet, judgmental breathing. See, George? Nothing, she said finally, clearly giving up. But I'm going to buy a camera tomorrow. I swear, if he throws one more drop of water on my foundation. They went inside, and the darkness returned. I waited another 5 minutes, my muscles cramping, before slinking back to the trench to finish the night's work. The close call only fueled my resolve. The risks were high, but the potential payoff, the quiet satisfaction of structural doom, was worth the anxiety. On the 4th night, I encountered a more unexpected and frankly more hilarious obstacle. A friendly, philosophical, and extremely drunk neighbor from 3 streets over. I was tamping down the last clump, disguising the turned earth with a layer of mulch, when I heard heavy, off-key singing approaching from the sidewalk. When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amour. A man stumbled around the corner of the fence, holding an empty bottle of cheap bourbon. It was Larry, a retiree known for his nocturnal, inebriated strolls. He stopped right beside me, completely oblivious to the illegal foundation sabotage happening a foot away. "Well, hello there, neighbor," Larry slurred, weaving slightly. "Hard at work, I see. You're a dedicated fella. Dedicated to... What is this? A new hedge?" I quickly stood up, pulling my hood down over my head. "Just planting some slow-growing bamboo, Larry, for privacy." "Privacy!" Larry roared, throwing his head back in laughter. "There's no such thing as privacy, my friend. It's an illusion. We're all connected. Every root, every weed, every neighbor's secret is shared in the great soil of life." I wanted to scream. I wanted him to leave. Instead, I had to participate in a long, absurd dialogue while my criminal evidence lay literally at my feet. "That's a very deep thought, Larry," I managed, trying to edge away. It is. See, I've been thinking," Larry continued, pointing the empty bottle at the sky. "What is a property line? It's just a line of chalk. But the Earth? The Earth is one big, messy, interconnected whole. Your roots and her roots, they're going to meet eventually. They can't help it. It's the natural order." I had to play along. "You have a point, Larry. We are all interconnected. But I prefer my interconnections to be clearly delineated." "Nonsense," Larry slapped my shoulder hard. "Embrace the mess, embrace the chaos, that's where the growth is. Let those roots run wild. Let them teach the house a lesson about what's truly important." Larry then launched into a 10-minute monologue about the philosophical implications of lawn care, comparing the meticulous control of the suburban lawn to the tyranny of modern capitalism. All the while, I was subtly pushing the last of the mulch over the fresh earth, praying the drunk man wouldn't trip and fall directly into the evidence. Finally, Larry wandered off, singing a slightly different, equally off-key tune. I collapsed onto my heels, heart pounding. My hands were covered in mud. The moso was planted, and I had just received the most profound, drunken philosophical justification for my act of botanical terrorism. The planting was done. Now, the waiting game began. I described the waiting period internally as a slow, psychological torture. It wasn't about if the bamboo would penetrate, it was when, and I had to maintain my facade of innocence through months of silence, knowing the slow-motion structural collapse was inevitable. The silent, subterranean battle had begun. The months that followed were characterized by a quiet, agonizing anticipation. The above-ground bamboo was still small, mere decorative shoots, but I knew what was happening beneath the surface. I imagined the rhizomes, thick and tenacious, spreading out like a subterranean spiderweb, feeling for the cold, hard resistance of the concrete. Then, the signs began. It started subtly. Karen was out one morning, yelling into her phone, pacing back and forth. I watched from my kitchen window. She was pointing at her driveway, where a tiny hairline crack had appeared near the edge, precisely where I had planted the most aggressive clump. A week later, the crack had widened. It now had a tiny green sprout, fighting its way through the asphalt. The first sign of success. I heard Karen's voice the next day, sharp and accusatory, directed at George. "George, look at the walkway. The pavers are shifting. They are moving. Leo's faulty French drain has ruined the substrate. I told you he was sabotaging us." I maintained a perfect radio silence. My internal monologue was a symphony of smug satisfaction. It's not me, Karen. It's the Earth. It is merely asserting its rights over your poorly constructed colonial. Karen decided to take preemptive action, which was precisely what I wanted. She called a foundation repair contractor to assess the minor cracks. This was my next operational pivot. I needed the official diagnosis to be confusing, deniable, and completely unhelpful to Karen's cause. I needed to corrupt the evidence. I spotted the contractor's truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 with concrete and crawl spaces painted badly on the side, pulling up to Karen's driveway. The contractor, a burly man named Gus with a suspicious handlebar mustache, got out, clipboard in hand. I walked over immediately, maintaining my friendly neighbor persona. "Morning, Gus," I called out cheerfully. "Leo Avery. You must be here for Karen Albright's settling issue." Gus raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, said she's got a crack. Blames the neighbor's, excessive watering." I leaned in, adopting a grave tone. "Gus, let me tell you, I've been a good neighbor. I even had to replace my prize-winning roses after a pesticide incident that left me heartbroken. But I did have a faulty sprinkler system a few months back, I'll admit that. I think that excessive water accelerated the natural settling process." I subtly slid a crisp $100 bill into the clipboard's clip, ensuring his eyes followed the movement. Now, Karen, she's a little excitable. She'll probably blame my new privacy hedge. That's just bamboo, harmless, really, planted legally back there. But what I need you to do is write the most honest report you can. A report that confirms it's merely natural soil settling that has been exacerbated by the pre-existing soil conditions and the recent extreme saturation. Gus gave the money a thoughtful look, then tucked the clipboard under his arm. His mustache twitched. "Settle up issues, huh?" Gus drawled, scratching his cheek. "That's what we call it in the business." "Yeah, buddy. Some soil just moves with more spite than others. It's a natural phenomenon. The contractor who poured her foundation probably skipped the proper soil compaction. I'll write up the report, Leo. I'll blame the soil. It's always the soil." The exchange was perfect. Gus was now an unwitting $100 accessory to my crime. He produced a beautiful, officially stamped report for Karen that stated the foundation issue was primarily due to unforeseen hydrostatic pressure and inadequate soil compaction, with no observable link to adjacent properties' landscaping. Karen was furious. She shoved the report in my face, screaming about Gus's incompetence, but I just shrugged, pointing to the official seal. "Karen, it's a professional analysis. The Earth is shifting. It's science. You can't sue science." And then, today happened. The day the rhizomes, having found the weak point, decided that enough was enough. The quiet, relentless force had worked. The roots had wedged, grown thicker, and finally stressed the concrete beyond its tolerance. The sound that jarred me from my iced tea reverie was the final, magnificent surrender of her home's structural integrity. Karen's finger was still pointed at me, trembling. The large, jagged crack dominated her house, a thick, aggressive clump of moso bamboo, now fully established and bursting with confidence, sprouted directly from the fissure. The police, Officer Reynolds and Officer Miller, arrived again. This time, they weren't dealing with a soggy lawn. They were dealing with a structurally compromised house. A fire marshal was also present, looking grave. Karen immediately zeroed in on the cops, practically dragging them to the bamboo. "Look, officer, look!" she wailed, her voice thick with hysteria. "It's the bamboo! I told you! He planted an invasive species. He did it on purpose to crack my house in half." Officer Reynolds sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Ms. Albright, we understand your distress, but what exactly do you want us to do?" I stepped forward, calm, reasonable, and holding my copies of Gus's report and my original nursery receipts. "Officer, may I clarify?" I said, projecting sincerity. "I planted a fast-growing privacy hedge. I have receipts here showing I purchased it for landscaping and privacy screening. I planted it 10 feet from the property line, well within code. This is moso bamboo. It's dense, yes, but it's sold commercially." I handed Officer Reynolds Gus's report. "Now, I deeply regret Ms. Albright's misfortune, but my contractor's official report states this is natural soil settling and pre-existing structural weakness, possibly exacerbated by the previous excessive water which I immediately corrected, and which the police noted at the time." Officer Miller, the rookie, looked utterly baffled. "But sir, the plant is coming out of the house. That seems intentional." "Officer, plants grow," I countered with an air of dignified patience. "It found a pre-existing weakness caused by Ms. Albright's poor foundation maintenance, perhaps from the mold she was worried about, and exploited it. That's biology. Is it my fault that her foundation was too weak to handle a simple root system? I don't believe there is a law against planting root systems on my own property." Karen was apoplectic. "He's lying! He's admitting he planted the running kind. It's malicious!" Officer Reynolds looked from the cracked wall to the calm face of the man holding official reports, then back to the shrieking woman. She spoke slowly, with the finality of an experienced referee. "Ms. Albright, without proof of malicious intent, proof that he deliberately sabotaged your foundation, not just planted a robust species on his own land, and with an official contractor's report attributing the damage to soil issues, this is definitively a civil property dispute. We can't arrest a man for planting a bush. You need to hire a lawyer and file a suit." They left. Karen stood by her cracked home, utterly defeated in the court of law and the court of public opinion. I had weaponized environmental science, weaponized a contractor, and won the decisive victory in the most dramatic way possible. But the final accounting needed to be settled in arbitration. The civil suit took 3 agonizing, bureaucratic months. Karen sued me for the full replacement value of her foundation, which came to just over $150,000. I countersued for the replacement value of my prize-winning Midnight Velvet Roses, plus the labor hours I lost due to my emotional distress and the time spent managing my new French drain. We met in a small, windowless conference room for arbitration, presided over by a tired, middle-aged woman named Judge Heller. Karen and her lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Finch, sat across from me and my own lawyer, a wonderfully aggressive woman named Clara. Mr. Finch began, gesturing dramatically toward me. "Your Honor, my client's home has been rendered structurally unsound by the malicious, deliberate actions of the respondent, Mr. Avery. He planted an invasive species, running bamboo, specifically to destroy her foundation. We have photographic evidence of the plant growing out of the crack." Judge Heller looked at me. "Mr. Avery, your response?" I nodded to Clara. Clara stood up. "Your Honor, while we deeply regret the coincidental timing of Ms. Albright's structural issues, we have provided an official, signed contractor's report, Exhibit A, stating the damage is due to hydrostatic pressure and pre-existing soil compaction issues. My client merely planted a privacy hedge on his property, documented in his nursery receipt, Exhibit B, and within the legal zoning requirements. We cannot be held liable for the inadequacy of the claimant's structural maintenance." Karen leaned forward, practically vibrating with rage. "What about the roses? He admitted I killed the roses. It was my only defense against his water attacks." Mr. Finch paled, trying to shush her. "Your Honor, please disregard that outburst. It's irrelevant to the foundation claim." Clara pounced. "It is absolutely relevant, Your Honor. My client's original prized plants, the Midnight Velvet hybrids, were illegally poisoned with glyphosate. We have the lab report, Exhibit C. The emotional distress and financial loss caused by this blatant act of criminal vandalism were the direct precursor to Mr. Avery feeling the need for an exceptionally dense privacy barrier. Ms. Albright started the conflict with an illegal act. Mr. Avery responded with a legal, albeit robust, landscaping choice." The judge leaned back, her face utterly impassive. She clearly saw the petty, spiraling nature of the conflict. "Mr. Finch," the judge said dryly, "can you deny that your client maliciously poisoned the respondent's roses?" Mr. Finch hemmed and hawed. "Your Honor, we cannot confirm nor deny her proximity to the spray application, but we assert that the value of his roses is insignificant compared to the value of her home." The hearing concluded after 2 hours of increasingly absurd back and forth. The judge retired to consider the ruling. We were called back an hour later. Judge Heller looked directly at both parties. "This court recognizes a clear, documented case of vandalism by the claimant, Ms. Albright, against the respondent, Mr. Avery, concerning his prize-winning roses. The cost of replacement is significant. This court also recognizes that the respondent, Mr. Avery, planted a highly aggressive, non-native plant directly near the shared property line, which has contributed to, though cannot be solely blamed for, the subsequent structural damage to the claimant's house, given the conflicting contractors' reports." She slammed her gavel once. "Due to the difficulty of proving malicious intent in the planting of the bamboo, the claimant's suit for full foundation replacement is dismissed. However, the respondent is ordered to pay $5,000 toward the cost of removing the bamboo and installing a containment barrier. In turn, the claimant, Ms. Albright, is ordered to pay the respondent, Mr. Avery, the full appraised value of his award-winning rose hybrids, which totals $12,500, as documented in Exhibit C. A stalemate. A financial victory for me. The court recognized Karen's crime and minimized mine. In the hallway outside the arbitration room, Karen approached me, her eyes bloodshot, her lawyer frantically telling her to stay silent. "Leo," she spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss. I hope you're happy. My house is condemned. I have to move." I looked at her calmly. "Karen, I am sorry about your house. I truly am. But you murdered my babies. You brought a chemical weapon to a gardening fight. The judgment speaks for itself." She paused, defeated, and gave me the closest thing she was capable of offering to an apology. I shouldn't have killed your roses. They were better than my petunias. Are you satisfied now?" I shook my head slowly. "I am satisfied, Karen, that the earth seeks balance. I planted a hedge, and you were too weak to handle it. You are paying me for my roses, and that is all the satisfaction I require." I sat on my porch the following week, sipping a final iced tea. Karen's house was marked with bright yellow tape. The cracked house stood as a testament to the dangers of underestimating a gardener's rage. I had been forced to remove the triumphant Moso bamboo that caused the final, magnificent crack, but I replaced it with a slightly tamer, though still aggressive, clumping variety. The lot next door was now being prepped for new construction, and I had seen the plans. The new foundation included a full underground concrete rhizome barrier, a foot thick and 10 feet deep. I smiled. I'd taught the next owner a lesson, too. I'd lost a few $1,000s in legal fees, but I'd won my soul, kept my dignity, and seen justice delivered by a plant. I looked at my restored midnight velvet roses, now thriving in the sun. It was the greatest landscaping project of my life.